The wind howled across the skybridge like a wounded creature, carrying the cold taste of metal and the faint smell of stormlight as neon towers rose on both sides like silent watchers. And in the middle of that endless height stood Lyra, an alien girl with trembling hands and empty eyes, her silver blue skin glowing softly under the shifting lights as if the city itself was whispering its last prayers for her. Far below her feet, the world moved in slow motion, lights flashing, hovercraft drifting, crowds gathering in tiny clusters, people pointing up in shock and fear while drones hovered in perfect circles, ready to record the moment history might break a young soul. But Lyra did not see any of it. She only saw the endless drop beneath her, a space so deep it felt like freedom and punishment at the same time. Her thoughts felt heavy like broken stones in her chest, memories of betrayals cutting through her mind one after another, the shame of being called a traitor when she was only trying to protect her people, the echo of her house elders turning their backs on her, and the final unbearable silence of the one person she once loved refusing to even look at her, all of it spinning around her like dark smoke. Pushing her closer to the edge, she whispered something to herself. A small sound the wind almost stole away. A sound that did not belong to a princess or a scholar but to someone who believed she had run out of reasons to exist. Her bare feet shifting dangerously near the sharp lip of the skybridge floor as the lights below blurred into soft tears in her eyes. Then everything changed with a voice, a simple human voice cutting through the storm like a warm blade, steady, calm, and carrying something she had not heard in a long time, something almost forgotten. Lyra, don't move. I'm coming closer, Evan Hale said, his boots silent on the metal walkway as he approached without armor, without a weapon, without anything except a translator pin glowing faintly on his collar and hands raised in peace. Lyra's head tilted slightly, her glowing hair drifting across her face like threads of starlight, while she tried to understand why a human had come here, why he was talking to her like they had met before, why his voice did not hold fear or judgment but something deeper, something heavy yet gentle, something warm enough to reach through the storm wrapped around her heart. You don't know me, she said quietly, every word shaking. You don't know what I've done. Evan took another slow step toward her, his eyes never leaving hers, his breathing steady even though the harsh wind threatened to push him back, and he spoke with the tone of someone who had stood in dark places and knew how fragile a soul could become. Maybe I don't know everything, but I know what it looks like when someone feels alone at the edge. Lyra's lips trembled as she turned her face toward the void again, watching the blur of vehicles and lights far below as if they were worlds she no longer belonged to. I broke my people's law, I exposed the council, I ruined everything, she whispered, her voice thin like cracked glass. My name means nothing now. Evan stopped only a few steps away, close enough to feel the cold wind pushing against her back, close enough to feel the fear hidden behind her stillness. And he spoke in a voice quieter than the sirens rising behind them. Your name matters more than you think, and your breath matters more than the lies told about you. She stared at him with wide, wounded eyes, unable to understand why he cared, why he didn't look at her like the crowds below did, as if she was a scandal or a headline, because his gaze felt different, deep, heavy with memories she could not yet see. Why are you here, she asked, her voice cracking. Why would a human come for someone no one else wants? Evan breathed slowly as if steadying something inside him, and he said the words that made her fingers freeze around the ledge. Because I once lost someone this way, someone I loved. Someone I arrived 5 minutes too late for. The storm paused in her chest. I could not save her, he continued softly. But I can save you. If you let me. For the first time Lyra blinked at him, confusion and pain swirling together. The wind blowing strands of her glowing hair around her face as she whispered, You don't even know if I deserve saving. Evan shook his head gently, his eyes holding a sadness deeper than the night below them. Deserving has nothing to do with it. Breathing has everything to do with it. Behind them the sirens grew louder, the palace enforcer craft slicing through the fog with beams of red light as cameras zoomed in, catching every twitch of Lyra's hands and every unarmored step Evan took toward her. The entire city hanging between silence and tragedy. Evan extended one hand slowly, his voice dropping into something raw and human. If you jump, the universe loses a story it hasn't heard yet, and I won't let it happen, not while I'm here. Not while you're still fighting inside. Her grip loosened, then tightened again, her breath shaking as tears finally spilled down her sharp alien cheeks, falling like tiny stars toward the void, and her voice broke into a wounded whisper. Then tell me why my life still matters. Evan stepped closer, the distance between them shrinking as the storm carried the words between their hearts. It matters, he said. Because you're still asking. And for the first time since her world collapsed, Lyra didn't step forward, she stepped back, away from the drop, toward the voice of the human who refused to let her disappear. The sirens faded into the distance as Evan guided Lyra away from the deadly edge, his hand hovering near her back without touching, offering safety without pressure. And for a long moment she simply stood there, breathing unevenly as if learning how to exist again, the stormlight flickering across her tear-stained face like gentle fire. She looked fragile yet unbroken, a cracked crystal still reflecting light, and Evan could see the tremor in her shoulders as she tried to hide the shame that clung to every inch of her. "They think I'm a liar," she whispered, her voice still shaking. "They think I betrayed my people." Evan's brows tightened as he watched her wrap her arms around herself, the wind pushing her glowing hair against her cheeks like soft threads of blue flame. "People believe what they're told," he said gently, taking a slow breath as he chose each word carefully. "But lies don't change what actually happened." Lyra closed her eyes as if bracing for a storm inside her own mind, old memories rising like shadows she couldn't escape. And when she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of entire worlds. "I uncovered something in the Royal Council. Something they were planning. Something unforgivable," she said, her fingers curling as if gripping invisible chains. "I tried to warn my house, I tried to tell the truth. But they silenced me. They called me unstable. They stripped my title." The pain in her words cut deeper than any blade, and Evan felt it like a bruise in his chest, a familiar ache of helplessness and loss. "What were they planning?" he asked softly, not as a soldier, but as someone who needed to understand why she had been pushed to the edge of existence. Lyra hesitated, her breathing turning colder as she looked out at the neon city below, the towers reflecting her haunted eyes. "They want to sacrifice the lower district," she said, her voice trembling. "They want to let an enemy fleet strike it during the peace ceremony, so they can frame them and force the galaxy into a treaty under fear." Evan stared at her, the truth settling like a stone inside him, heavy and suffocating. "How do you know this?" he asked, though he already sensed the answer through the pain written across her face. "I saw the orders," she whispered. "I leaked the data. I tried to warn the people. But the council erased my proof and declared me dangerous. They said I was delusional, that I wanted chaos, that I betrayed my duty." Her voice cracked again. "My own fiancé said I shamed his house with lies. He wouldn't even listen." The words hit Evan like a wave, because betrayal by the one you trust is a wound that never truly stops bleeding. "You did the right thing," he said quietly, stepping closer so her shaking frame didn't feel so alone against the cold wind. "You tried to save lives. That doesn't make you a traitor. That makes you brave." But Lyra shook her head as if choking on her own memories. "Bravery doesn't matter when no one believes you," she murmured. "I ran because they were coming to arrest me, and then the whole city started calling me a traitor. I felt their eyes everywhere. I felt my world collapsing piece by piece." Evan's voice softened, carrying the warm gravity of someone who had known darkness but refused to let it claim another soul. "And you felt like there was no place left for you," he said, his tone a quiet echo of her pain. She nodded, her throat tight, her hands pressed together like she was trying to stop herself from breaking again. "I thought if I ended it, at least the noise would stop," she whispered. "At least the shame would stop following me." Evan's chest tightened with a familiar ache, and he took a slow breath before speaking. "Lyra, shame doesn't come from truth. It comes from the lies others build around you, and I won't let those lies be the last thing written about you." Her eyes met his, glowing gently in the storm's light, full of confusion and a fragile spark of hope she didn't know how to hold. "Why do you care so much?" she asked softly. "You could have left. You could have watched like everyone else." A shadow passed through Evan's eyes, the kind of shadow that carried stories he rarely shared. And when he spoke, his voice felt older than the wind around them. "Because once," he said, "I tried to save someone I loved from the edge, but I reached too late," he swallowed. "And I can't erase that pain. But I can make sure I don't fail again." Lyra breathed in sharply, something in his words breaking through the fog wrapped around her heart. And for a moment she didn't seem like a fallen princess or a hunted traitor. She seemed like someone who wanted to believe there was still a reason to stand. Evan reached into his coat slowly, revealing a small silver shard drive glowing with faint blue patterns. "You said they erased your proof," he said softly. "But maybe not all of it." Lyra's breath caught as she realized what he held. her hand lifting unconsciously before she whispered, That's my data key. I found it near the broadcast station, Evan said gently. Someone tried to destroy it, but the core survived. And if this contains what you say it does, then we have a way to show the truth. Her fingers hovered over it, trembling as if touching it might burn her. If the council finds us with this, they'll kill us, she said in a broken whisper, fear and determination clashing within her voice. Evan nodded, his expression calm but fierce. Then we don't let them find us, he said, his voice steady like a promise carved in stone. We run, we fight, we survive, but most of all, we make sure the truth lives. Lyra stared at him, the storm reflecting in her eyes as something inside her shifted, a fragile spark turning into a quiet flame, and for the first time she whispered words she never thought she would say again. Help me, Evan. He closed his hand gently over the shard drive, his gaze locking with hers through the cold wind and the glowing fog. I'm with you, he said, all the way. And as the distant hum of Enforcer craft grew louder again, Lyra stepped closer to him, not to hide, but to stand beside the only person who believed her, the only person who refused to let her fall. The neon rain began to fall as Evan and Lyra stepped off the sky bridge and into the winding streets below, the droplets glowing with soft colors as they slid down the metallic walls, and the quiet hum of distant hovercraft vibrated through the air like a warning. The city itself was trying to whisper, and Lyra could feel the fear inside her growing with every heartbeat. She stayed close to Evan, her steps unsteady, her breath sharp each time the echoes of sirens bounced off the narrow buildings around them. And even though she told herself she was used to running, something about this night felt heavier than all the nights before, as if the city had closed its eyes and was waiting to see which of them would fall first. Evan scanned every corner with the trained calm of a soldier who had seen too many traps to trust silence, his hand hovering near the small shield generator on his belt, and though he tried to keep his voice steady, there was a new tension in it when he said, They're moving fast, faster than I expected. Lyra swallowed hard as she tried to match his pace, her cloak brushing against the neon-lit walls, her glowing hair reflecting soft blue and silver ripples on the wet ground. They won't stop now, she murmured, her voice barely a breath. They think I'm trying to destroy the council. They'll follow us until we're dead. Evan shook his head slightly, his eyes sharp even through the swirling mist. You're not destroying anything, he said. You're saving people. And that terrifies them. Before she could answer, a sudden screech cut through the air like claws ripping metal, and a patrol drone swooped low from above, its red beam slicing across the ground and landing directly on them, bathing them both in a violent glow that made Lyra's heart crash against her ribs. Evan grabbed her waist and pulled her into a narrow side alley, just as the drone fired a burst of energy that cracked the wall where they had stood seconds earlier, sparks exploding in a shower of fractured light, the alley filling with smoke and the sharp smell of burning steel. Run! Evan breathed, his hand gripping hers tightly, and Lyra didn't hesitate as they pushed deeper into the alleyway, boots splashing through shallow puddles that trembled under the weight of their footsteps. Behind them, the drone turned, its engines roaring as it scanned the alley entrance, and the rain seemed to freeze for a moment as Evan reached into his coat, pulling out a small cube with glowing lines across its surface. Cover your ears, he whispered. Lyra obeyed just as he slammed the cube against the wall, and a silent shockwave flashed outward, rippling through the air like a bright pulse of breath, the drone jerking violently before dropping from the sky with a metallic shriek, crashing into the street behind them as its lights flickered out one by one. Lyra stared at the fallen machine, her chest rising and falling fast as her voice trembled. You didn't kill it. Non-lethal, Evan said gently, breathing hard. I'm not here to start a war. His voice carried something heavier than exhaustion, something close to sorrow. And for a moment Lyra realized that Evan wasn't only fighting for her life. He was fighting against the pieces of his past that still lived inside him, the kind of pieces that made a man choose mercy even when anger would be easier. They moved again, this time through a broken market path, neon lamps flickering overhead while the scattered remains of old stalls rustled with the passing wind, and Lyra guided him through the maze-like corridors with surprising familiarity, her eyes tracing hidden routes that only someone who had once listened to the stories of commoners would know. You've been here before, Evan said softly, noticing the way she walked as if she had once belonged among these quiet corners. Lyra nodded, her steps slowing as memories surfaced like distant waves. I used to come here to study people, she whispered. I wanted to understand their lives, their fears, their hopes. but I never imagined they would one day pay the price for something they didn't do." Evan listened, realizing that her courage hadn't begun on the sky bridge. It had begun long before that, in the quiet places where she learned how deeply her people suffered under the weight of the Council's hidden greed. But before he could speak, a sudden metallic crash echoed behind them, loud enough to shake the rusted beams above, and Lyra froze as shadows moved at the alley entrance, the heavy footsteps of armored enforcers growing louder with each breath they took. Evan glanced around, calculating their next move, his jaw tightening as he whispered, "We can't fight them here." Lyra grabbed his arm, her voice urgent and filled with fear. "There's a passage behind the old temple. Follow me." They sprinted through the rain-soaked alley, their feet slipping on the wet ground as the enforcers shouted commands, beams of red light slicing through the darkness behind them, hitting walls, exploding crates, shattering lamps in blinding flashes. Lyra leaped over a broken pillar, her breath ragged, and Evan was only a step behind when the ground shook violently as an energy blast struck the wall near them, the shock wave throwing them both forward in a burst of heat and dust. Evan hit the ground hard but rolled fast, pulling Lyra up with him as she winced in pain, her arms scraped and glowing faintly from the impact, and he whispered fiercely, "Keep moving, Lyra. Don't stop." She pushed forward even as her legs trembled, even as her lungs burned, because something stronger than fear was keeping her alive now. Something that felt like purpose, something shaped by the voice of a human who believed her even when her own people turned away. They reached a hidden stone archway, half buried in vines and shadows, and Lyra pressed her hand against an old carved symbol that glowed faintly under her touch, the wall vibrating before sliding open with a low, ancient rumble revealing a dark passage beyond. She stepped inside, turning back toward Evan with eyes that held fear, hope, and a fragile spark of trust. "This leads to the Temple of First Dawn," she whispered. "If they want to stop us, they'll have to face more than just truth." Evan nodded and followed her into the darkness, the stone door sliding shut behind them as the voices of the enforcers echoed faintly on the other side, fading into silence as the hidden passage swallowed them whole. The hidden passage swallowed them in darkness as the stone door sealed behind them, leaving only the faint echo of the city's chaos fading somewhere far away. And for a few breaths, Lyra simply leaned against the cold wall, her chest rising and falling as if the weight of every moment since the sky bridge was trying to crush her from the inside. Evan stayed close, watching her with the quiet focus of someone who understood that silence could be heavier than fear. His breathing slow, his hand hovering near her shoulder without touching, offering presence instead of pressure. And for a moment the dim corridor felt like a fragile sanctuary carved between life and danger. Lyra lifted her hand, pressing it gently against the carved patterns glowing faintly under her touch. Old symbols that shimmered like ancient memories waking from sleep. And she whispered, "This passage was built for the royal bloodline, a secret path for protection, refuge, and truth." Her voice soft but trembling. "I never thought I would return here like this." Evan looked around as the corridor slowly lit with pale golden lines running across the walls, revealing murals of warriors, scholars, and queens who had shaped her people's history, their faces stern yet calm, watching them like silent witnesses. "Why here?" he asked quietly. "Why bring us to this place?" Lyra stepped forward, the faint light reflecting along her skin as she walked deeper into the ancient hall. "Because the truth began here," she whispered. "And I think the truth must rise here too." Her voice wavered like a candle fighting the wind, and Evan could hear the pain she was holding back. The kind of pain that didn't just bruise the heart but carve through it, leaving scars that never healed cleanly as they moved deeper. The corridor opened into a vast underground chamber glowing with soft amber fire, the air warm and heavy with the scent of old incense and polished stone, and at the center stood the Temple of First Dawn, a place older than the city above, older than the Council's rule, older even than many of the laws used to judge her. Tall pillars carved with swirling constellations surrounded them like guardians frozen in time, and in the far corner sat an armored figure made of bronze and crystalline metal, its helmet shaped like the rising sun, its breastplate engraved with the promise of unity between her people's houses. And Lyra's breath caught as she stepped closer, her fingers brushing the cold edge of the armor. "This belonged to my ancestor," she said quietly. "She was the first dawn-bearer, a warrior who fought not to destroy, but to bring peace to the fractured houses." Evan watched her as she knelt before the armor, her eyes softening with something between sorrow and reverence, and he realized this place wasn't just a sanctuary for her, It was a memory of everything she had once believed in, everything she thought had died when the Council twisted her truth into betrayal. "This armor isn't for war," Lyra whispered. "It's ceremonial, a symbol of integrity and courage." Her fingers tightened on the edge of the breastplate. "My ancestor swore an oath here to protect truth, even at the cost of her own life." Evan stepped closer, his voice low and steady. "Is that why you came here?" Lyra nodded as she wiped a strand of glowing hair from her face, her eyes shining with fragile determination. "I need strength that isn't born of fear," she whispered. "I need to remember who I was before they broke me." She stood slowly, placing both hands on the armor's crystal chest, and the chamber trembled ever so slightly as the carvings on the walls pulsed with soft light, reacting to her presence as if the temple itself recognized her bloodline, recognized her pain, recognized her courage. With a deep breath, she spoke words that flowed like ancient water from her lips, an oath whispered in her mother tongue, her voice steady even as her hands shook. "I, Lyra of the Dawnline, vow to protect the truth that was stolen, to shield the innocent who were abandoned, and to rise again not for vengeance, but for justice." The armor flashed with a warm glow, its crystal heart pulsing once, twice, as if awakening, and Lyra stepped back in shock as a faint ring of light circled her feet before fading into the stone beneath her, leaving behind a trembling silence that felt sacred. Evan watched her with a deep, quiet awe, his own heart tightening at the sight of her standing tall again, her shoulders no longer weighed down by despair, but lifted by something brighter than hope, something that felt like destiny. "You're stronger than you think," he said softly, his voice filled with a warmth that matched the temple's glow. Lyra turned toward him, her eyes shimmering like starlight through tears she no longer tried to hide. "I'm stronger because you believed me when no one else did," she whispered, the words trembling like fragile glass. Before Evan could answer, a soft rustling echoed from the far side of the chamber, followed by the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps, and both of them turned sharply as a hooded figure stepped into the light, ancient robes brushing the stone floor with each step. Lyra's breath caught, the color draining from her face. "Priest Kareth," she whispered, recognizing the old guardian of the temple, a man rumored to know every hidden truth buried beneath the city. The old priest lowered his hood, revealing eyes that were calm yet heavy with years of secrets, his voice deep and steady. "You have returned, Lyra of Dawn," he said, "and you are not alone." Evan stepped forward protectively, but the priest raised a gentle hand. "Do not fear me, human," he said. "I have waited for this moment, and there is something you both must see." He reached into his robe and pulled out a small crystalline device glowing with soft blue light, the same color as Lyra's shard drive, and Evan felt his pulse quicken as the old man whispered, "This contains the truth the Council tried to bury." Lyra's breath shook, hope and fear tangling inside her like fire and ice, as the priest extended the device toward her and said, "You were never alone, child of dawn, not then, not now." And the chamber glowed brighter as if the past and future had begun to breathe together, whispering a promise neither of them could yet understand. The chamber seemed to pulse with living light as Lyra held the crystalline device in her trembling hands, its soft blue glow reflecting across her cheeks like tiny stars. And for a long moment she could not breathe, because the weight of everything she had lost and everything she still carried pressed against her heart with the force of an entire world. Evan watched her carefully, his expression steady yet filled with a quiet strength, a silent promise that she was no longer facing the darkness alone. And the old priest, Kareth, stood beside them with the patience of someone who had waited many years for this moment to arrive, his voice deep and calm as he said, "The truth you hold is only half of what was hidden." Lyra looked up sharply, fear and hope clashing inside her like two storms fighting for the sky. "Half?" she whispered. "What do you mean, half?" Priest Kareth stepped closer, his robe brushing softly against the stone floor, his hands lifting to reveal another device embedded with ancient sigils, glowing faint amber through the dust of time, and his voice carried the weight of a secret too heavy for one lifetime. "Your shard drive contained the plan," he said gently, "but mine contains the Council's signatures approving it." Evan exhaled sharply, understanding immediately what that meant. The final proof, the undeniable connection, the kind of evidence that could topple powerful men and rewrite the laws they hid behind, and he whispered, "This is enough to expose them all." Lyra's hands tightened around her device as her heartbeat thundered in her ears, and her voice cracked with disbelief and fragile relief. "You kept this," she murmured. "All these years, you kept this." Kareth bowed his head slightly, his old eyes soft with sorrow. Your mother asked me to protect it, he said quietly. She feared the Council's hunger for control long before you were born. But the day she died, I realized it was no longer safe to reveal the truth without risking your life. The words struck Lyra like a silent blow, her breath catching as the old pain she had carried for years reopened inside her. My mother knew, she whispered. She knew the Council would one day turn against the bloodline of Dawn. The priest nodded, his voice carrying the ache of someone who had kept too many secrets for too long. She believed you would finish what she could not. Evan stepped closer, placing a steady hand on Lyra's shoulder, offering a grounding warmth as her emotions trembled like glass about to crack. Lyra, he said softly, you have more strength in you than anyone I've ever seen. She looked up at him with eyes that shimmered like reflecting stars, tears pooling but not falling, and her voice wavered. I'm afraid, I know, Evan whispered, his voice gentle but steady. But courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward even when fear is crushing you. Before she could answer, the sound of distant explosions rumbled faintly through the stone walls, the vibrations rippling across the floor like the footsteps of giants, and all three turned sharply as the golden flames flickered under the pressure. Kareth's expression darkened with recognition. The enforcers have reached the outer temple, he said, his voice suddenly tense. They are using heavy charges. They mean to level the entrance and collapse the passage. Lyra's heart raced, panic rising like a cold tide in her chest. They want to bury us alive, she whispered. Evan's jaw tightened as he stepped forward, scanning the glowing walls for exits, his training rising instinctively in his movements, his voice firm and controlled. Then we move fast. We take the evidence and get out before the whole chamber falls on us. Kareth nodded. But his old eyes held something more, something sorrowful and resolute, and before either of them could stop him, he stepped toward the far end of the chamber where a hidden panel glowed faintly beneath the wall carvings. There is a path that leads closer to the archive spire, he said, but only two can travel its length. Evan froze, realizing immediately what the priest meant. No, he said sharply. We go together. But Kareth simply smiled, a soft, tired smile that felt like the last warm breath of a long life. My duty was to guard the truth, he whispered. Yours is to carry it, Lyra shook her head, stepping toward him with desperation tightening her throat. I won't leave you, she said, her voice cracking like thin ice. You're the only one who believed in my mother. The only one who... The walls suddenly shook harder as another explosion boomed through the earth, dust falling from the ceiling in trembling streams, cracks appearing along the ancient stone tiles, and Kareth cupped Lyra's cheek with a gentle hand, his voice filled with a warmth that soothed even as it broke her. Child of Dawn, he whispered, your mother saved many lives, and now you must save many more. He placed the amber device into her palms, his fingers pressing it firmly over her trembling hands. The truth belongs to the future, not to the past. Evan grabbed Lyra's arm, pulling her toward the hidden panel as the rumbling grew louder, the ancient pillars trembling as if the temple itself was struggling to stay alive under the assault above. And he whispered, urgently, Lyra, we have to go. She hesitated for a single heartbeat. Her eyes locked with the old priest's, and in that moment, she felt the weight of her lineage settle on her shoulders, not like a burden, but like a calling she could no longer run from. Kareth placed his hand against the ancient symbol on the wall, activating the narrow hidden passage that glowed with white-blue light, and as the door slowly slid open, he gave them both one last look, a look that carried pride, sorrow, and the peace of someone who had fulfilled his final promise. Run and don't look back, he said softly. Evan pulled Lyra into the passage just as the chamber behind them erupted in blinding light, a deafening roar swallowing the old priest's final silhouette as stone and fire collapsed over him like a closing night sky. Lyra cried out, reaching toward the fading light, her voice breaking with grief, but Evan held her tight, his own throat tight with emotion as he whispered fiercely, he saved us so we could save everyone else. The passage sealed shut behind them, cutting off the sound, leaving only the echo of loss and the weight of destiny pressing against their hearts as they ran into the glowing darkness together. The narrow passage trembled as Lyra and Evan ran through it, their footsteps echoing against the glowing walls like desperate heartbeats trying to outrun fate, and the air felt thick with dust, heat, and the fading memory of the old priest who had given his last breath for the truth they now carried. Lyra's eyes burned with tears. She forced herself to hold back, each step pulling her farther from the temple and deeper into the weight of everything she had just lost. And even though the passage was dim and tight, she could feel the ghost of Kareth's final words pressing against her ribs, reminding her that grief could not stop her because lives far beyond hers depended on what came next. Evan kept a firm grip on her arm, guiding her through the twisting corridors with steady breath and unwavering focus. But even he felt the pain in his chest as the memory of the collapsing chamber haunted the back of his mind.
And though he didn't speak it aloud, he knew sacrifices like Kareth's were the kind that carved scars into the soul.
As the passage widened ahead, soft shafts of blue light began piercing through cracks in the ceiling, and Lyra slowed as she recognized the faint hum vibrating through the floor. "We're close," she whispered, her voice trembling but certain. "This tunnel leads to the lower level of the archive spire." Evan nodded, scanning the shifting lights with soldier-trained eyes. "Then we need to move fast," he murmured. "Once we reach the spire, the whole city will be watching." The deeper they went, the more the air changed, warming slightly as if the city's massive power grid pulsed beneath them like an artificial heartbeat, and Lyra felt a strange pull inside her chest, a mix of fear and responsibility merging into something sharper than either alone, something that reminded her she was no longer running from her past but toward her destiny. They emerged into a wide chamber lined with ancient engine conduits humming softly with energy, the floor covered in layers of dust broken only by old footprints from priests long gone, and Lyra stepped forward slowly, lifting her glowing hand to activate the hidden stone plate carved with galactic dawn symbols. As the plate lit up and slid aside, revealing a metallic lift platform beneath, Evan stepped past her, checking the shadows and the corners out of instinct. But before he could say anything, a distant explosion shook loose a rain of dust from the ceiling. "They found the other entrance," Lyra whispered, her heart tightening. "The enforcers are coming." Evan didn't waste a second, pulling her onto the lift and slamming his palm onto the old activation rune, and the platform began rising with a deep mechanical rumble that vibrated through the nearly forgotten gears, lifting them toward the surface where the spire loomed like a silent titan watching over the city. As they ascended, the ceiling split open above them to reveal a long vertical shaft lit by electric blue lines running along the walls like living veins, the hum of energy growing louder with each passing second, and Lyra looked up with wide eyes, feeling the weight of history and danger pressing together as one. When the lift stopped, they stepped into a dim maintenance level beneath the spire's main floors, the air warm and filled with the hum of thousands of data streams flowing through the walls, glowing like rivers of liquid light around them. And Lyra felt a sharp ache in her chest as she whispered, "This is where they control every broadcast, every message, every truth the world is allowed to hear." Evan moved ahead, scanning carefully, but a sudden flicker of red light made him freeze, and both of them pressed back against the wall as an enforcer patrol strode past the far corridor, armored feet thudding against the metal floor like a countdown to disaster. Lyra held her breath, her body trembling, her eyes squeezed shut as she imagined what would happen if they were caught here with the evidence, her mind racing through every possible outcome, every memory of the council calling her delusional, every face that turned away from her, every step that pushed her closer to the sky bridge edge days earlier. When the patrol finally disappeared, Evan exhaled slowly and pulled her forward again, their steps soft and calculated as they moved through the maze-like maintenance tunnels, weaving between pipes and data conduits until they reached a heavy circular door marked with the sigil of the Council's broadcast authority. "This is it," Evan whispered, planting his hand on the scanner and pulling out the shard drive with his other hand. "If we can get inside, we can transmit the evidence to every screen in the city." Lyra swallowed hard, her fingers curling around the second device, the one the old priest had given her, the one containing the Council's signatures, and her voice trembled as she whispered, "Once this goes out, there's no going back." Evan looked at her then, really looked, his eyes reflecting the glow of the conduits like quiet fire, and his voice softened into something deep and steady. "Lyra, everything that happened, every loss, every lie, every wound, it all brought us here," he said. "We're not going back. We're going forward." Before either of them could speak again, the door hissed open with a rush of cold air, lights flaring inside the chamber as alarms began to flash softly along the floor, bathing the room in alternating waves of red and white. Lyra stepped forward with her heart pounding, but just as they crossed the threshold, a dark silhouette emerged from behind the central console, and her breath froze in her chest as a cold, familiar voice cut through the glowing air like a blade. "Well," the figure said, stepping into the light with calm cruelty etched across his features. "I was wondering how far the traitor would run." It was Lord Varos, the counselor whose signature was etched on both devices, the architect of the sacrifice, the man who had twisted truth into poison. And he stood before them with the confidence of someone who believed he had already won. Lyra's blood turned to ice as Varos smiled slowly, his eyes glinting with a darkness that made the whole spire feel colder than the night outside. "You should have stayed on the ledge," he whispered. "It would have saved you the humiliation." Evan stepped in front of her instinctively, muscles tightening, eyes sharp, ready to fight even if it meant dying. And Lyra felt the fire inside her rise again. Not fear this time, but something brighter, something born from the temple, the oath, the sacrifice, and the truth she carried in both trembling hands. The central chamber of the archive spire vibrated with power as Lyra and Evan stepped fully into the control room, the hum of energy streaming through the walls like rivers of light that carried the pulse of the city itself. And for a moment everything froze as if the universe held its breath, waiting to see which way the balance of truth would fall. Lyra's fingers trembled over the two devices, the shard drive with her data, and the priest's amber crystal with the council's signatures, and the weight of countless lives pressed down on her chest as she whispered. "This is the moment." Evan stood beside her, his hand hovering protectively near hers, his eyes scanning the dark corners of the chamber even as his heart raced, knowing that every second counted and that any misstep would mean death or the complete destruction of hope. Lord Varos stepped closer, his boots clicking against the polished floor, the red and white lights of the alarms flickering across his face, making the shadows in his eyes sharper, more cruel, and his voice carried the calm of a man who believed victory was inevitable. "Do you really think a human and a child can undo decades of control?" he sneered. "The city belongs to us, the law belongs to us, and soon you will belong to the past." Lyra's chest tightened, but she drew a deep, steadying breath, feeling the fire of her ancestors running through her veins, the oath she had spoken in the Temple of First Dawn igniting a courage she had once thought lost. And she whispered under her breath, "No, we belong to the truth." Evan's eyes met hers, a silent understanding passing between them, and he murmured, "Then let's make sure it's heard." Lyra placed the devices carefully into the control console, and the machines hummed as if recognizing her authority, the amber sigils glowing, the blue light pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat, and the room itself seemed to lean forward, waiting for the moment when silence would be shattered. Varos advanced, his hand twitching toward the nearest weapon console, ready to cut them down if he could. But Evan stepped forward, his body tense like a coiled spring, and his voice rang out, calm but fierce. "If you touch them, you will answer for every lie, every death, every life your council destroyed." The enforcer's eyes flickered with surprise, realizing that the humans who had always been dismissed as outsiders had the courage to defy him, and for the first time Varos hesitated. Just a fraction of a second, enough for Lyra to press the final activation button. The devices sprang to life with a brilliance that made the entire chamber glow, streams of data flowing upward and cascading beams toward the spire's communication satellites, each pulse carrying the proof of every crime, every deception, every attempt to manipulate the city and its people. Lyra's voice trembled as she shouted, "The truth is alive! Every life matters. The council cannot hide from justice any longer." Evan pulled her close for balance as the chamber shook violently, alarms screaming louder, and the spire's walls reflected every image, every screen in the city catching the transmission simultaneously, the holographic displays erupting with the evidence of Varos's treachery and the council's hidden orders. Varos stepped back in disbelief, the cruel mask of certainty cracking as every lie he had relied on splintered in real time, and he reached for the console in a last desperate attempt to erase the files. But the system rejected him, recognizing Lyra's authority, her bloodline, and the oath she had fulfilled. The guards in the chamber froze, their own eyes catching the flood of evidence, murmurs of recognition and shock spreading quickly, as the city below began to erupt not in chaos but in clarity, the citizens seeing the truth for the first time, their fear giving way to resolve. Evan whispered gently, "It's done, Lyra. The city sees the truth." And she stood tall despite the tremor in her legs, the weight of her ancestors and the priest and every life she had fought for pressing her down, yet lifting her at the same time. Varos's shoulders sagged, his pride shattered, and the guards around him, seeing the tide of proof and the courage of the young alien and her human ally, laid down their weapons slowly. the echo of surrender rolling through the chamber like a quiet wave. Lyra lowered her hands from the console, tears glimmering in her glowing eyes as she whispered softly, "The truth is stronger than fear." Evan took her hand, holding it steady, his own chest heaving with relief and exhaustion. "And so are you," he said simply. And for the first time in days, the wind of the city seemed to sigh through the spire, carrying away the tension, the fear, and the shadows that had clung to them above them. The city lights reflected off the rain-soaked streets, citizens cheering as news of the exposed council spread like wildfire. The power of hidden hands finally revealed to all, and somewhere in the distance, the first morning rays of the sun broke over the horizon, casting gold across buildings and wet neon alike. Lyra looked out across the glowing cityscape, her heart racing, knowing that the battles were far from over, that the scars of betrayal and loss would remain. But for the first time, she felt the fragile spark of hope ignite into a steady flame, one that could not be extinguished by fear or lies. Evan stood beside her, watching the dawn with quiet awe, and he whispered, "You didn't jump because you believed life mattered, and now the world can see why it always matters." Lyra smiled faintly, the warmth of the rising sun touching her glowing skin, the weight of the past still heavy, but tempered by the courage she had found. And she whispered, "We will rebuild not just the city, but the truth that guides it." Together they stood on the edge of the spire, looking down at the city that had once almost swallowed them in despair, and above the storm, the neon lights and the dawning sky, Lyra realized that she had not only survived, she had become the voice of hope, the bearer of truth, and a reminder that even in the darkest corners, life, courage, and honesty could rise like dawn over the world. And the first rays touched both her and Evan, the city below and the future that stretched before them, wide, uncertain, but finally theirs to shape.